we have all, of course, seen the images of Pakistan on our television screen and the sheer scale of the climate catastrophe. But this climate catastrophe isn't simply an extreme weather event. It's an extreme weather event, it's climate, and it's coming into, of course, the toxicity of structural inequality, of poverty, of a country that has been deliberately impoverished over not just decades, but the result of hundreds of years of colonial extraction, and a country that is locked into an international economic system which has left Pakistan paying 85 rupees out of every 100 rupees it raises in debt repayments to private creditors and, of course, the global banks of the North. If ever there was a moment for us to understand that we need not just action on climate in terms of cutting carbon, but a deep systemic change to an economic model that many of us call racialized capitalism, which has been deliberately constructed on the idea of profit accumulation, of extraction of resources and exploitation of people, but it's also said that there are large parts of the world, people who are black or brown or poor or indigenous, who can be deliberately sacrificed in the name of this motive of profit accumulation. So that's why as climate justice people, we've always said system change, not climate change. But now is the moment to make those demands more concrete. Not only to be talking about immediate debt cancellation of Pakistan's illegitimate debt, but also talk about the disparities of how does a country like Pakistan rebuild when 70% of its population are already locked into poverty, where 70% people have issues about access to food. This isn't simply about rebuilding or better disaster management or about adapting infrastructure. This is a reality of countries increasingly be overwhelmed by what is not just a series of crises, but a permanent crisis for the global south. And it's not just, of course, Pakistan's extreme weather in terms of these floods. It's a reality of what comes next for Pakistan. Pakistan, as you know, is home to over 7,000 glaciers, more glaciers than any other single country in the world. And those glaciers are melting, and as they melt, the glacial lakes get bigger and bigger, and then when we get extreme monsoon rains, those glacial lakes overflow their banks. And the reality, of course, is not just that Pakistan now will increasingly see more and more floods. It's when those glaciers actually melt, the whole of the Indian subcontinent will be affected in terms of access to fresh water, because it's those glaciers that feed the whole of the Indian subcontinent. It's now predicted that up to 40% of the Indian subcontinent's 1.8 billion people will be without access to fresh water within the decades to come. This is not about simply tinkering around the edges anymore. We can no longer tinker around the edges, and the reality, of course, is that the global north has known about these, has known about the scale of this crisis, has known every single thing. This is not about governments haven't been able to act rationally because they don't know the evidence. They've long known the evidence, but they've taken the decision. It's a political decision, and it's a political decision that says we have to put the economic interests of our economy ahead of people and ahead of people in the global south. That's why we had this random 2-degree target, which was an economic target conjured up by Nordhaus, who was a neoliberal economist, who won a Nobel Prize for saying that, who went on to say, well, the economy could actually survive a 4-degree warming of the planet because economic growth would continue. Yes, people might suffer. Yes, millions of people might be impoverished. Yes, parts of the world would be inhospitable. But the global economy would still continue to accumulate profit. And of course, that's part of their solutions. The solution to these crises is more false solutions, more green tech, more conjuring and banking on mad, bad and dangerous schemes such as bioenergy, carbon capture and storage, or new geoengineering initiatives which seem to come out every other day, some new mad idea. The reality, as we all know, is we're only going to change that when we build power. And that's why we've always got to build movement of movements. We've got to, here in this country now, when we've got 4.3 million children growing up in poverty, 40 million people in poverty, a cost of living crisis, of course, which is not just in the UK, but it's global. We have to make sure our movements don't turn their back on climate, don't ignore climate, and also don't ignore the international nature of these crises. don't turn their back on internationalism and focus only on the material issues and the economic issues here within the UK. We have to tie these issues together. We have to tell a very, very different narrative. We have to say that the answer in this cost of living crisis requires more than just cutting fossil fuels. It means more than just end a new wave of fossil fuel extraction. It actually starts to talk about what is our economy for? How do we ensure everybody has the right to live with dignity? How do we live with dignity in balance with the planet? We know we can do that. We have the solutions. What is lacking is the political will. And the political will only come when we as people build our movements. And throughout history, as we all know, any change that has ever happened has come not because of the elites, it's because we have built our collective power. Whether it's ending colonialism and imperialism, whether it's the right for women to vote, whether it's labour laws, absolutely everything has been built but on the premise of ordinary people uniting and coming together. And we have to remind the labour movement that on the banners of the labour movement, it doesn't say workers of England unite, it says workers of the world unite. That the rallying call of the labour movement was always internationalism, that we can't sacrifice the workers of the global south simply in the interests of workers in the global north. We have to connect those fights. So yes, for living wages, yes, for right to energy, yes, for the right to food, but also we have to rebalance and ensure we have climate reparations. The flow of capital that's flown from the global south to the north. And we all know, and I'm sure you all know, that just during the British Raj, just the British Raj, right? Britain looted £45 trillion out of the Indian subcontinent. It said that Britain never spent a single penny of its own money on its expansion into Australia, New Zealand, Canada. It never spent a penny of its own money on the new colonial wars. Those were all from colonial extraction of resources, not just from the Indian subcontinent, from the continents all around the world. And that continues today. That's why we're not interested in charity. We're not interested in more climate finance if it's seen as charity. Because every single dollar that flows from the global north to the global south, $24 still flow from the south to the north. The reality is it's the global south that is developing the global north. Every brick and mortar in these countries in the global north has come through the extraction and exploitation of people. That's why we have to talk about climate reparations. We have to talk about redistribution of wealth. We have to talk about a new economy, an economy that is based on our well-being and on people and on our planet and not on profit accumulation. Thank you. Woo! Yeah.